Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Theodore Ted Barlow adjusted his reading glasses and closed the quarterly security report spread across his mahogany desk. At 52, he commanded respect in Chicago's corporate security industry. His firm, Barlow Securities, protecting everything from tech startups to Fortune 500 companies. The silver threading through his dark hair and the weathered lines around his steel-gray eyes told stories of 20 years in military intelligence before building his empire from nothing. His office overlooked Lake Michigan, where cargo ships dotted the horizon like chess pieces. Photos lined his credenza. His wedding day with Eleanor 30 years ago, Katie's graduation from Northwestern, family vacations from better times. The largest frame held his Bronze Star Commendation from Afghanistan, though Ted rarely spoke of those years. Paul Hines knocked and entered without waiting, a privilege earned through 15 years of friendship and business partnership. The Morrison contract came through, $12 million over 3 years. Paul's enthusiasm couldn't hide his concern. "You've been working late again. Eleanor mentioned you missed dinner Tuesday." Ted leaned back in his leather chair. "Security doesn't sleep, Paul. Neither should we." But his friend was right. Lately, work had become his refuge from the growing tension at home. His daughter Katie had married Kurt Douglas 18 months ago, and since then, family dinners had become battlefields. Kurt Douglas represented everything Ted despised: entitled, manipulative, and lazy. The 28-year-old had charmed his way through various sales jobs, never lasting more than 2 years anywhere. His latest venture involved some cryptocurrency scheme that made Ted's instincts scream danger. But Katie, brilliant as she was with her MBA from Kellogg, seemed blind to her husband's true nature. Katie called, Paul said carefully. "She wants to meet tomorrow about investing in Kurt's project." Ted's jaw tightened. "She knows my answer. Maybe talk to Eleanor first. She thinks you're being too hard on him." Eleanor, his anchor for 3 decades, the woman who'd waded through his deployments and celebrated every victory. She believed in giving people chances, seeing good where Ted saw threats. It was why he loved her and why it sometimes drove him insane. That evening, Ted found Eleanor in their Winnetka kitchen, her auburn hair pulled back as she prepared his favorite pot roast. At 50, she remained the most beautiful woman he'd ever known, though worry lines had appeared around her green eyes recently. "Katie stopped by today," she said without turning around. She looked tired, stressed. "Kurt's been working long hours on his new business." "What business?" "Separating investors from their money." Ted poured himself bourbon neat. "Theodore." Eleanor's tone carried 30 years of gentle reproach. "She's our daughter. She needs our support, not judgment." Ted studied his wife's reflection in the kitchen window. Eleanor had given up her teaching career to raise Katie and support his military service. She deserved peace in their golden years, not the drama Kurt brought to their family. "I've seen his type before," Ted said, "in interrogation rooms and congressional hearings. He's working an angle." Eleanor turned, her eyes flashing. "Not everyone is a threat assessment, Ted. Sometimes people just need help." Their argument was interrupted by Ted's secure phone buzzing. Work never stopped, but for the first time in months, he was grateful for the distraction. As he answered, Eleanor shook her head and returned to dinner preparation. Later, lying in bed beside his sleeping wife, Ted stared at the ceiling and wondered when protecting his family had become so complicated. In Afghanistan, enemies wore uniforms or at least carried weapons. Here, Threat smiled at Sunday dinners and called him Dad. His instincts had kept him alive through 3 tours and built a multi-million-dollar company. They were screaming now, but Eleanor was right. Katie was their daughter. Whatever Kurt was planning, Ted would be ready. He'd protected corporate executives from kidnapping, military installations from infiltration, and witnesses from assassination. One unemployed grifter shouldn't pose much challenge. As snow began falling outside their bedroom window, Ted made a mental note to have Brian Estes, his lawyer, run a deeper background check on Kurt Douglas. If his son-in-law was hiding something, Ted would find it. He always did. The foundation of the Barlow family had weathered many storms. Ted was determined it would weather this one too, no matter what it took. Chapter 2. The Call. 3 weeks after their kitchen argument, Ted was reviewing surveillance footage from a client's warehouse when his secure phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Eleanor's number, but her voice carried a terror he'd never heard before. "Ted, help me. Please." Her words came between chattering teeth and sobs. "I was robbed. They took everything. My purse, my car, even my coat. I'm so cold, and I don't know where I am." Ted was already grabbing his keys and tactical gear. "Eleanor, stay calm. Are you hurt? Are they still there?" "No, they're gone. I'm alone. There's snow everywhere, and I can't see any lights. They said I was 120 miles from home, but I don't know which direction." Ted's mind shifted into operational mode, emotions locked away for later. "Can you see anything? Road signs, landmarks, anything distinctive?" "There's an old grain elevator across the road. It says Morrison Feed on the side." "Ted, I'm so scared." Morrison Feed. Ted knew it, a defunct operation outside Rockford, Illinois, exactly 127 miles from Chicago via back roads. How the hell had Eleanor ended up there? "I'm coming, sweetheart. Find shelter if you can, but don't go far from where you are. I'll be there in 90 minutes. Ted's black Range Rover ate up the interstate, emergency flashers clearing traffic. He'd called Paul to coordinate with their security team and contacted Brian Schneider, a state police contact, to monitor radio chatter. No reports of robberies or abandoned vehicles matched Eleanor's situation. The drive gave him time to think, and what he thought didn't add up. Eleanor had said she was going to Katie's house for dinner. Their daughter lived in Evanston, a 20-minute drive north. How had she ended up 2 hours southwest, robbed and abandoned in rural Illinois? Ted found Eleanor huddled behind Morrison Feed's loading dock, wrapped in a maintenance tarp she'd discovered. Her lips were blue, her designer dress torn and mud-stained. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest as he wrapped her in emergency blankets from his survival kit. "It's over, sweetheart. You're safe." Ted helped her into the heated SUV, checking for injuries as he worked. Bruises on her wrists, a scratch on her cheek, but nothing requiring immediate medical attention. "Tell me what happened." Eleanor's story came in fragments between sips of hot coffee from Ted's thermos. She'd arrived at Katie's house around 6 for dinner. Kurt had been agitated, pacing and making phone calls. Around 8, he'd asked Eleanor to drive him to meet someone about his business venture, claiming his car was in the shop. He said it would take 30 minutes, Eleanor whispered. But we kept driving and driving. When I asked where we were going, he got angry. Then, these men appeared at a gas station, rough-looking men with tattoos. They pulled me out of my car, took my purse, my jewelry, everything. Kurt just stood there watching. Ted's blood turned to ice. Kurt was part of it. He kept apologizing, saying it wasn't supposed to happen this way. One of the men hit him too, told him to shut up. They threw us both in a van, but after about an hour, they pushed me out here and drove away with Kurt. The pieces clicked together in Ted's mind like puzzle fragments. Kurt had orchestrated this, using Eleanor as either collateral or leverage for something bigger. The robbery was cover for what? Insurance fraud? Ransom? Or something worse? Where's Katie in all this? Ted asked, though he dreaded the answer. Eleanor's face crumpled. She wasn't there when we left. Kurt said she was working late at the office. Ted, what if something happened to her too? Ted called Katie's number as he drove Eleanor home. Voicemail. He tried her office, her assistant, even Northwestern's alumni directory to reach her roommate. No one had seen Katie Douglas since yesterday afternoon. Back home, Ted settled Eleanor in their bedroom with hot tea and pain medication. She was physically safe but emotionally shattered. The woman who'd faced military wives' clubs and board meetings with Grace was undone by her son-in-law's betrayal. "Why would he do this to us?" she asked, clutching Ted's hand. "We helped him, supported his marriage to Katie. What did we ever do wrong?" Ted kissed her forehead, tasting salt and fear. "Nothing, sweetheart. This isn't about you. It's about him. Get some rest. I'll handle everything else." But as Eleanor finally fell into exhausted sleep, Ted's secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She's safe for now." $500,000 cash by Friday, or next time won't end so well. Instructions to follow. Tell no police, or she disappears forever. Ted stared at the message, then looked at his sleeping wife. Someone had just made the worst mistake of their life. They'd targeted Theodore Barlow's family, not knowing they'd awakened something that had toppled terrorist networks and destroyed cartels. Ted poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and opened his laptop. It was time to remind Chicago why his enemies usually didn't make the same mistake twice. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Truth. Ted spent the night in his home office, transforming it into a command center. His secure computers accessed databases most civilians didn't know existed, calling in favors from military intelligence contacts and corporate security networks. By dawn, Kurt Douglas's life was spread across 3 monitors like a dissected specimen. The picture wasn't pretty. Kurt had been fired from his last 2 jobs for irregularities, corporate speak for theft. His cryptocurrency venture was a shell company with no actual business operations. Most damning, his phone records showed contact with known associates of the Kozlov crime family, Russian emigres who specialized in insurance fraud and extortion. Paul arrived at 7 with coffee and grim news. Katie's car was found in a parking garage downtown. Security footage shows her leaving with 2 men around midnight, same time Eleanor was dumped. Ted studied the grainy surveillance photos Paul had acquired through their security contacts. The men flanking his daughter looked like muscle, thick builds, cheap suits, dead eyes. Katie appeared unharmed but frightened. Any word from the kidnappers? Paul asked. Ted showed him the threatening text. They want $500,000 by Friday. 3 days. That's nothing for you. Why risk it? Ted's laugh was bitter. Because it won't end there. Men like this, you pay once, you pay forever. Besides, I don't negotiate with terrorists, foreign or domestic. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her face pale but determined. I heard voices. Any news about Katie? Ted hesitated, but Eleanor deserved the truth. He showed her the surveillance photos, watching her face crumble as she recognized their daughter's fear. She looks terrified, Eleanor whispered. Ted, we have to pay them. We will, Ted said carefully. But we're going to be smart about it. Paul understood immediately. You have a plan. I always have a plan. Ted pulled up building schematics on his computer. The Kozlovs operate out of a warehouse district in Cicero. I've been tracking their activities for a client whose shipments kept getting hijacked. They think they're untouchable because they pay off the right people. Eleanor studied her husband's face, recognizing the cold calculation that had made him legendary in military circles. You're not just going to pay them, are you? No, sweetheart. I'm going to destroy them. The plan took shape over the next 24 hours. Ted's security firm maintained relationships with federal agencies, FBI, DEA, ICE, providing intelligence on organized crime activities. The Kozlovs had been under investigation for months, but prosecutors needed evidence that would stick in court. Ted intended to provide it, gift-wrapped with a bow. Brian Estes, Ted's lawyer, arrived Wednesday evening with documentation that would make their operation legal under federal anti-racketeering statutes. You're sure about this? Once we trigger the federal investigation, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment they touched my family, Ted replied. Eleanor had grown quieter as the plan developed, understanding that her husband was preparing for war. She'd seen this transformation before, during his military years. The gentleman she loved disappearing behind the cold professional who never lost. What about Kurt? She asked. He's still family, whether we like it or not. Ted's expression didn't change. Kurt made his choice when he used you as bait. Family doesn't endanger family. Thursday brought another text. Midnight tomorrow. Navy Pier parking garage, level 3. Come alone with the money or watch your daughter disappear. Ted showed the message to his team, Paul, Brian, and Virgil McCormick, his head of operations. All 3 were former military, bound by loyalty and shared experience. They'd planned operations in Kabul and Baghdad. Chicago would be a cakewalk. The pier gives us advantages, Virgil noted. Multiple escape routes, tourist crowds for cover, and we know the security layout. Paul was studying satellite imagery. Their mistake is thinking you'll come alone. They don't know about our surveillance network. Brian held up federal warrants he'd obtained through careful channels. Everything we're doing is legal under the Patriot Act. These men have ties to foreign criminal organizations. That makes this a national security issue. Eleanor found Ted on their bedroom balcony that evening, watching Lake Michigan's waves crash against the shore. Snow was falling again, blanketing their perfect suburban street in pristine white. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked, joining him at the railing. Ted wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I've never failed a mission, Eleanor. I won't start now. But what if something goes wrong? What if they hurt Katie?" Ted's voice carried absolute certainty. "Then God help them, because I won't." They stood together in the falling snow, a couple preparing for battle. Eleanor understood that tomorrow would change everything. Either they'd save their daughter and destroy their enemies, or Ted would die trying. After 30 years of marriage, she knew which outcome was more likely. The Kozlovs had made one fatal miscalculation. They'd researched Ted's bank accounts and business holdings, seeing only a wealthy target. They hadn't researched his background, his capabilities, or his connections. Tomorrow, they'd learn why Theodore Barlow's enemies usually didn't get second chances. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Friday morning arrived with the clarity of fresh snow and sharper purpose. Ted's team assembled in the Barlow Securities conference room at dawn. The space transformed into a tactical operations center. Monitors displayed real-time surveillance feeds from Navy Pier, wireless intercepts from the Kozlov organization, and tracking data from federal agencies now cooperating in the joint operation. Virgil McCormick spread building blueprints across the conference table. Pier Security runs skeleton crews on Friday nights. Perfect for their operation, but also perfect for ours. He pointed to various access routes. "We'll have overwatch positions here, here, and here. Paul's team covers the north approach. Mine takes south and east." Paul was coordinating with their federal contacts. FBI's standing by with tactical teams, but they won't move until we give the signal. ICE has immigration holds ready for any foreign nationals we identify. Ted studied the communications intercepts his cyber team had acquired. The Kozlovs were sloppy with their phones, assuming encryption software made them invisible. They hadn't counted on Barlow Security's government-grade monitoring capabilities. "They're planning to kill me after the exchange," Ted announced, reading translated Russian conversations. Dmitry Kozlov thinks eliminating the witness protects their operation. Eleanor entered carrying coffee and sandwiches, her face composed despite the circumstances. She'd insisted on staying involved, refusing to hide while her family was threatened. "Any word from Katie?" Ted showed her the latest intercept. She's being held at a warehouse in Cicero, alive and unharmed, but they're moving her to the pier 2 hours before the exchange. "And Kurt?" Paul answered grimly. "The Russians are done with him. Apparently, his cryptocurrency scheme was supposed to launder money for their organization, but he skimmed from the operation. They used him to get to your family, but he's a liability now." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "He brought this on our family. Whatever happens to him, he earned." Ted was surprised by his wife's steel, though he shouldn't have been. Eleanor had survived 20 years as a military spouse, including deployments where communication was sparse and danger constant. She understood what was necessary. Brian Estes arrived with final legal documentation. "Everything's in place. Federal prosecutors are ready to move on racketeering charges the moment we have evidence. ICE has deportation orders prepared for the Russian nationals." Ted reviewed the legal framework one final time. Nothing they planned violated federal law, and most of it would be actively supported by federal agencies. The Kozlovs had made themselves legitimate targets by engaging in organized crime activities. "Remember," Ted addressed his team, "this isn't revenge. It's justice. We're taking down a criminal organization that's been operating with impunity. Saving Katie is just the first step." The afternoon brought final preparations. Ted's tactical gear was civilian appropriate but military effective. Kevlar vest under a business suit, concealed weapons, and communications equipment disguised as everyday electronics. The briefcase he'd carry contained real money, $50,000 in cash to make the operation convincing, surrounded by tracking devices and recording equipment. At 4 p.m., Ted's phone rang with an unknown number. Katie's voice was strained but controlled. "Dad, they wanted to tell you they're serious. I'm okay but scared. Please just pay them and get me out of here. I'm coming for you, sweetheart. Hold on just a little longer. Dad, I'm sorry. About Kurt, about everything. I should have listened to you." The line went dead. Ted stared at the phone, his daughter's words twisting in his chest. She was 26 years old, brilliant and beautiful, and she'd trusted the wrong man. That mistake had nearly destroyed their family. Eleanor appeared beside him. She sounded strong. "She's a Barlow," Ted replied. "Strong runs in the family." As evening approached, Ted's team took their positions around Navy Pier. The tourist destination was nearly empty in the February cold, perfect conditions for the operation. Federal surveillance teams established perimeters, while Barlow Security's personnel monitored communications and escape routes. Ted arrived at the parking garage alone, the briefcase heavy in his hand. Level 3 was dimly lit and mostly empty, shadows stretching between concrete pillars. He found the designated spot, near the southwest corner, and waited. At 11:55 p.m., a black SUV pulled up. 4 men emerged, 3 obvious muscle and 1 older man in an expensive coat. Dmitry Kozlov himself, Ted realized, studying the man he'd been tracking for months. "Mr. Barlow." Kozlov's English carried a thick accent. "You bring money?" "I brought what you asked for," Ted replied, not moving toward them. "Where's my daughter?" Kozlov gestured, and the SUV's rear door opened. Katie stumbled out, her hands zip-tied behind her back, but otherwise unharmed. Relief flooded through Ted, followed immediately by cold fury at seeing his daughter bound like a criminal. "Money first," Kozlov demanded. Ted held up the briefcase. "Daughter first. You think you give orders here?" Ted's smile was predatory. "I think you're about to find out why that's exactly what I do." At that moment, floodlights blazed from 6 different positions as federal tactical teams surrounded the garage. Loudspeakers echoed with FBI commands in both English and Russian. Kozlov spun toward Ted, rage and understanding dawning simultaneously. "You brought police." "I brought justice," Ted corrected, as zip ties appeared around the Russian's wrists. "Something you've been avoiding for years." The takedown was textbook perfect. For Kozlov associates in custody, evidence of racketeering and kidnapping, immigration violations documented. The Russians had walked into a trap months in the planning, triggered by their decision to target the wrong family. Katie ran into her father's arms as FBI agents cut her restraints. "Dad, how did you?" "Later, sweetheart. Let's get you home to your mother." As federal agents processed the crime scene, Paul approached with grim news. "We found Kurt in the warehouse." The Russians weren't planning to let him live. Ted nodded, feeling no satisfaction in his son-in-law's fate. Kurt Douglas had made his choices and paid the ultimate price for betraying family trust. Justice had many faces, and sometimes it was swift and final. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Kozlov organization's Chicago operations were finished. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. The federal building downtown buzzed with activity as prosecutors prepared the largest organized crime case Chicago had seen in years. Ted sat in a conference room with FBI Special Agent Santiago Stokes, reviewing evidence that would put the Kozlov organization away for decades. "Your operation gave us everything we needed," Stokes said, spreading photographs and financial documents across the table. "Racketeering, kidnapping, money laundering, immigration violations. Dmitry Kozlov's looking at life without parole." Ted studied surveillance photos of the warehouse where Katie had been held. The facility contained evidence of multiple criminal enterprises: drug trafficking, human smuggling, financial fraud. The Kozlovs had been more extensive than anyone realized. "What about the other family members?" Ted asked. "Mikhail and Viktor Kozlov are already in federal custody. We're working with Interpol to freeze their overseas assets. This organization is finished." Eleanor and Katie arrived at noon, both looking healthier after 2 days of rest and recovery. Katie had been cleared by FBI psychologists and medical personnel, suffering no lasting physical harm from her ordeal. Emotionally, however, the experience had changed her. "I keep thinking about the signs I missed," Katie said, accepting coffee from her father. "Kurt's late-night phone calls, the mysterious meetings, his sudden interest in my trust fund. I was so blind." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "You were in love. Love makes us vulnerable." Ted's jaw tightened at the mention of Kurt's interest in Katie's inheritance. The trust fund Eleanor's parents had established was worth $3 million, accessible when Katie turned 27 in 6 months. Kurt had been positioning himself for a payday that would never come. Agent Stokes continued his briefing. "We found financial records showing Kurt Douglas owed the Kozlovs $200,000. His cryptocurrency scheme was laundering money for their operation, but he was skimming funds. They used your family as leverage to recover their losses." "So we were never the primary target," Ted observed. "No, sir. You were collateral damage in a business dispute. Unfortunately for them, they picked the wrong collateral." Katie looked up from her coffee. "Dad, how did you know to contact the FBI? How did you plan all this so quickly?" Ted exchanged glances with Eleanor, who nodded slightly. Their daughter deserved the truth about her father's capabilities. "I've been tracking the Kozlov organization for 6 months, Ted explained. "They were hijacking shipments for one of my corporate clients. When they targeted our family, it became personal. But the coordination with federal agencies. Barlow Securities maintains relationships with law enforcement and intelligence agencies. It's part of our business model. When domestic criminals connect to foreign organizations, it becomes a national security issue." Agent Stokes added, "Your father's operation was textbook perfect. We've been trying to build a case against the Kozlovs for 2 years. He handed us everything we needed in 72 hours. As they left the federal building, Katie walked beside her father through downtown Chicago's bustling streets. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the city clean and bright under winter sunshine. "I owe you an apology," Katie said quietly, "for not listening to your concerns about Kurt, for thinking you were being overprotective." Ted stopped walking and faced his daughter. "You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You trusted someone you loved. That's not a character flaw. But you knew. You saw through him immediately. I've spent 30 years identifying threats and analyzing risks. It's my job to be suspicious. Your job is to have faith in people, to believe in the best of humanity. Don't let one man's betrayal change that." Katie hugged her father fiercely. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for saving me. I love you too, and I'll always come for you, no matter what." That evening, the Barlow family gathered in their Winnetka home for the first peaceful dinner they'd shared in months. Eleanor had prepared pot roast, comfort food for traumatic times, and opened a bottle of wine they'd been saving for special occasions. "So what happens now?" Eleanor asked, raising her glass. Ted considered the question. The Kozlov threat was eliminated, federal prosecutions would proceed smoothly, and their family was safe. But deeper changes were necessary. "Now we rebuild," he said. "Katie moves back home until she's ready to be independent again. We go to family counseling to process what happened. And we remember that family is the only thing that really matters." Paul Hines called after dinner with final updates on the case. "The Russians are cooperating with prosecutors, hoping for reduced sentences. They're giving up contacts in Moscow, New York, and Miami. This case will echo for years. And our business? Exploding. Every corporate security firm in the country wants to know how we coordinated such a perfect operation. We'll be turning away clients." Ted felt no satisfaction in professional success built on family trauma. The Kozlovs were finished. Kurt was dead, and justice had been served. But the cost had been enormous. His daughter's innocence, his wife's sense of security, their family's peace. As he locked up the house for the night, Ted reflected on the week's events. He'd protected his family using skills developed in distant wars and corporate boardrooms. The operation had been flawless, the outcome decisive. Yet something felt unfinished. The Kozlovs were Russian criminals who'd eventually face justice through proper legal channels. Kurt Douglas was dead, beyond earthly punishment. But there were others who'd enabled this situation, others who bore responsibility for targeting his family. Ted opened his laptop and began researching. Someone had provided the Kozlovs with information about his family: financial records, personal details, security vulnerabilities. Professional criminals didn't randomly select targets like Eleanor Barlow. As dawn approached, Ted found what he was looking for: financial records showing payments from a Chicago law firm to offshore accounts connected to Kozlov money laundering operations. The firm handled estate planning for wealthy families, including the Barlows. Someone had sold his family's information to criminals for money. Someone who knew Eleanor's schedule, Katie's trust fund details, and Ted's security protocols. The Kozlovs were finished, but Ted's war was just beginning. Chapter 6. Setting the Trap. The law firm of Kelvin Gould & Associates occupied 3 floors of a prestigious Michigan Avenue building, serving Chicago's elite with estate planning, tax shelters, and wealth management. Ted had used their services for 15 years, trusting them with his family's most sensitive financial information. Now he sat in his Range Rover across the street, studying the building through high-powered optics. Somewhere inside, someone had betrayed his family's trust for Russian money. Ted intended to find out who. The financial trail is clear, Paul said, reviewing data on his tablet. 3 payments totaling $50,000 from Gould's operating account to Cayman Island banks connected to Kozlov money laundering. Someone sold your family's information. Virgil McCormick was monitoring communications from their surveillance van. We're intercepting all phone and internet traffic from building. If they contact anyone suspicious, we'll know immediately. Ted had spent the week developing his plan with methodical precision. Unlike the Kozlov operation, this required subtlety and patience. The target was a respected law firm with legitimate clients and political connections. One mistake would destroy Ted's reputation and potentially expose his family to new dangers. What's the approach? Paul asked. We go in as potential clients, Ted replied. New identity, clean background, significant assets requiring legal protection. We'll interview every partner and associate until we find our traitor. Brian Estes had prepared the false documentation: offshore companies, international investments, complicated estate planning needs that would justify extensive meetings with the firm's senior staff. Ted would pose as Christopher Sampson, a security contractor with global operations and liquid assets requiring sophisticated legal structures. Eleanor was waiting in the lobby when Ted returned home, her face showing the strain of the past week. Since Katie's rescue, she'd thrown herself into volunteer work and charity activities, seeking normalcy after trauma. Any progress? She asked. Ted sat beside his wife on their living room sofa. We're close. Whoever sold our information will face justice. And then this will be over. Ted hesitated. Eleanor deserved honesty, but she also deserved peace. Yes, sweetheart. Then it's over. But Ted knew it would never truly be over. The violation of their family's trust had shown him vulnerabilities he'd never considered. Professional criminals could research potential targets through public records, social media, and business databases. But intimate details, Eleanor's schedule, Katie's trust fund, his security protocols, required inside information. Someone they trusted had betrayed them for money. Monday morning, Ted walked into Kelvin Gould & Associates wearing a conservative business suit and carrying a briefcase containing carefully prepared financial documents. The reception area was elegant and discreet, designed to impress wealthy clients seeking sophisticated legal services. Mr. Sampson. The receptionist smiled professionally. Mr. Gould is ready to see you. Kelvin Gould was a distinguished man in his early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. His corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, decorated with expensive art and photographs showing him with Chicago's political elite. Mr. Sampson, welcome. I understand you have complex international holdings requiring legal guidance. Ted played his role perfectly, describing fictional overseas operations and domestic investments that would require detailed estate planning. As they spoke, he studied Gould carefully, looking for signs of nervousness or recognition. Your situation is certainly complex, Gould said, reviewing Ted's fabricated financial statements. I'd like you to meet with several of our specialists. Different aspects of your holdings require different expertise. Over the next 2 hours, Ted met with 4 associates and 2 junior partners. Each interview was recorded through devices concealed in his briefcase. Every conversation analyzed for inconsistencies or suspicious behavior. Most of the lawyers were exactly what they appeared: competent professionals handling legitimate estate planning for wealthy clients. But Lowell Beard, a junior partner specializing in offshore financial structures, triggered Ted's instincts immediately. Beard was nervous throughout their meeting, asking probing questions about Ted's background and security arrangements. He seemed particularly interested in family members and their financial arrangements, the exact information the Kozlovs had used to target Eleanor and Katie. Security is obviously important in your line of work, Beard said. How do you protect your family from potential threats? Ted's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm very careful about who I trust with sensitive information. After leaving the law firm, Ted met with his team to review the day's intelligence gathering. Virgil had intercepted dozens of phone calls and emails, most involving routine legal work. But one conversation stood out: Lowell Beard calling an unlisted number 30 minutes after Ted's departure. He's talking to someone in Russian, Virgil reported. Poor quality connection, probably international. He's describing his meeting with Christopher Sampson and asking for instructions. Paul was already pulling up Beard's background through their corporate databases. Lowell Beard, 34, divorced, 2 kids, heavy gambling debts, behind on child support payments, expensive lifestyle on a junior partner's salary. Motivation for selling client information, Ted observed. Gets worse, Paul continued. His ex-wife filed for increased child support 6 months ago. His gambling debts total over $300,000. He was desperate for money. Ted studied surveillance photos of Beard leaving the law firm. The man looked haggard and nervous, constantly checking his phone and surroundings. Classic behavior for someone living under threat. He's scared, Ted noted, probably being pressured by his Russian contacts to produce more client information. Brian Estes arrived with legal documentation. We have enough evidence for federal prosecutors to obtain warrants. Fraud, racketeering conspiracy, violation of attorney-client privilege. He's looking at serious prison time. But Ted was thinking beyond legal prosecution. Lowell Beard had betrayed his family's trust and nearly gotten Katie killed. Federal prison was justice, but it wasn't enough. The man needed to understand the full consequences of his choices. We're not going to federal prosecutors yet, Ted announced. First, we're going to teach Mr. Beard about the risks of betraying client confidentiality. Eleanor was in their kitchen when Ted arrived home, preparing dinner with unusual intensity. She'd been cooking elaborate meals since Katie's rescue, finding comfort in domestic routines after their world had been turned upside down. You found him, she said without looking up from her preparations. Yes, a junior partner named Lowell Beard. Gambling debts and financial problems led him to sell client information to the Russians. Eleanor's knife paused in its cutting. And what are you going to do about it? Ted studied his wife's profile, recognizing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. What do you think I should do? Eleanor turned to face him, her green eyes hard as emeralds. I think he nearly got our daughter killed for money. I think he violated our trust and endangered our family. I think he deserves whatever happens to him. Ted was continuously amazed by his wife's strength. Eleanor understood that some violations required responses beyond legal prosecution. She'd supported his military career, knowing that justice sometimes came from the barrel of a gun rather than the gavel of a judge. He'll face federal charges, Ted promised. But first, he's going to learn what it feels like to be hunted. As snow began falling outside their kitchen window, Ted began planning the final phase of his operation. The Kozlovs had been eliminated through federal law enforcement. Kurt Douglas had paid with his life for his betrayals. Now it was time for Lowell Beard to understand that betraying Theodore Barlow's family carried consequences beyond anything he could imagine. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Lowell Beard's gambling addiction had taken him to the underground poker rooms beneath Chicago's Chinatown, where desperate men played with money they couldn't afford to lose. Tonight, he was losing badly to players who looked like they might break bones for unpaid debts. Ted watched from across the smoky room, dressed like any other blue-collar gambler seeking easy money. His surveillance team had been tracking Beard for 3 days, learning his habits and identifying his vulnerabilities. The lawyer was predictable. Every Tuesday and Friday night, underground poker until dawn. He's down $8,000 tonight, Paul reported through Ted's earpiece. Borrowed money from a loan shark named Chun who doesn't accept excuses. Ted smiled grimly. Lowell Beard was about to have a very bad evening. At 2 a.m., Beard stumbled out of the gambling den, drunk and desperate. He lost $12,000 of borrowed money, bringing his total debts to over $300,000. According to intercepted phone calls, his Russian contacts were demanding more client information to offset his gambling losses. Ted followed Beard to his Lincoln Park apartment, an expensive space the lawyer could no longer afford. The building had poor security and multiple access points, perfect for what Ted had planned. Beard's apartment was dark when he entered, fumbling with keys and muttering about his losses. He flipped on the lights and froze. Ted was sitting in his living room chair, wearing black tactical gear and holding a suppressed pistol. "Good evening, Lowell," Ted said conversationally. "We need to talk." Beard's face went white. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I'm Christopher Sampson. We met yesterday at your law firm. Except my real name is Theodore Barlow, and you sold my family's information to Russian criminals." The lawyer's legs gave out, sending him crashing onto his expensive sofa. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ted pulled out a tablet showing financial records. $50,000 from Kelvin Gould and Associates to Cayman Island accounts controlled by the Kozlov crime family. 3 payments coinciding with information transfers about my family's security arrangements. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can." Ted played audio recordings of Beard's phone calls with his Russian contacts. "We've been monitoring your communications for a week. Federal prosecutors have enough evidence to put you away for 20 years. Beard was hyperventilating now, understanding that his world was collapsing. "Please, I have kids. I needed the money for gambling debts." The Russians said nobody would get hurt. "But people did get hurt," Ted said coldly. "My wife was terrorized and abandoned in freezing weather. My daughter was kidnapped and held for ransom. My son-in-law is dead. All because you sold confidential client information for gambling money. I'm sorry. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Ted leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sorry isn't enough, Lowell. You're going to help me finish this." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Beard would contact his Russian handlers, claiming to have new intelligence about the Barlow family security arrangements. He would arrange a meeting to transfer information and collect payment. What the Russians wouldn't know was that federal agents would be recording everything. "They'll kill me if they find out I'm cooperating," Beard whimpered. "They'll kill you anyway," Ted replied. "The Kozlov organization has been dismantled. Dmitry and his brothers are in federal custody, facing life sentences. Their remaining associates are eliminating loose ends, and you're the loosest end of all." Ted showed Beard surveillance photos of other Kozlov associates who had been found dead in the past week. "You have 2 choices. Cooperate with federal authorities and enter witness protection, or wait for the Russians to clean up their mess permanently." Beard stared at the photos, finally understanding his situation completely. He was a dead man walking unless he cooperated fully. "What do you want me to do?" Ted outlined the operation. Beard would contact his handler and arrange an emergency meeting, claiming to have intelligence about additional Barlow family assets requiring legal protection. The meeting would occur in a location chosen by federal agents, with full surveillance and tactical support. "If you try to warn them or deviate from the plan," Ted continued, "you'll face federal prosecution for treason, conspiracy, and accessory to kidnapping. That's life in federal prison, assuming you survive long enough to be sentenced." Brian Estes arrived at 4 a.m. with federal warrants and immunity agreements. "Lowell Beard, you're under arrest for violation of attorney-client privilege, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." As federal agents processed the scene, Ted stepped on a Beard's balcony overlooking Lincoln Park. Dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In a few hours, the final phase of his operation would begin. Eleanor was awake when Ted returned home, reading in their bedroom with coffee and worried expression. How did it go? Beard is cooperating fully. We'll have his Russian contacts in custody by tonight. Eleanor closed her book and studied her husband's face. And then it's really over? Ted sat on their bed and took his wife's hand. Yes, sweetheart. Then it's over. But privately, Ted knew this was just the beginning. The violation of his family's security had revealed vulnerabilities he'd never considered. Professional criminals could access surprising amounts of information about potential targets through corrupt lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. The Kozlovs were finished, Kurt Douglas was dead, and Lowell Beard would spend decades in federal prison. But other criminals would see the Barlow family as attractive targets. Successful business owner, valuable assets, predictable routines. Ted's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Stokes. Final operation tonight. Target location secured. Your lawyer is performing perfectly. Ted deleted the message and looked at his sleeping wife. Eleanor had given him 30 years of love and support, standing by him through military deployments and business struggles. She deserved peace in their golden years, not constant vigilance against criminal threats. As snow continued falling outside their bedroom window, Ted made a decision that would change everything. The Kozlov operation had been about justice and family protection. What came next would be about sending a message to every criminal organization in Chicago. The Barlow family was permanently off limits. Chapter 8, Total Victory. The abandoned warehouse in Cicero had been transformed into a federal surveillance operations center, with agents monitoring every entrance and communications channel. Tonight would end the last remnants of the Kozlov organization's Chicago operations, with Lowell Beard serving as the bait to draw out remaining associates. Ted watched from the command vehicle as Beard entered the warehouse at exactly 9 p.m., wearing recording equipment and a GPS tracker. The lawyer looked terrified, but was following instructions perfectly, understanding that cooperation was his only chance for survival. Subject is in position, Agent Stokes reported. Surveillance teams have eyes on all approaches. 3 black sedans arrived within minutes, disgorging 6 men who moved with military precision. The remaining Kozlov associates were heavily armed and clearly suspicious, scanning the warehouse for potential threats before approaching Beard. They're nervous, Paul observed through high-powered optics. Something spooked them. Ted studied the surveillance feed showing the men surrounding Beard inside the warehouse. Their body language suggested imminent violence rather than routine information exchange. Someone had warned them about potential law enforcement involvement. Abort, Ted commanded. They know it's a trap. Agent Stokes was already coordinating tactical teams. All units move in. Subjects are armed and dangerous. The warehouse exploded into chaos as federal agents breached from multiple entrances, automatic weapons fire echoing off concrete walls. Ted watched the tactical display showing agent positions and subject movements, calculating odds and outcomes with cold precision. 2 suspects were down immediately, caught in crossfire between FBI tactical teams. 3 others barricaded themselves behind shipping containers, returning fire with military-grade weapons. The 6th man, the leader, based on his position, was advancing on Beard with a pistol drawn. Sniper authorization requested, came the radio call. Granted, Agent Stokes replied. The warehouse fell silent as the final shot echoed off industrial rafters. 6 suspects neutralized, no federal casualties, and enough evidence recovered to prosecute remaining Kozlov associates across 3 states. Lowell Beard was found hiding behind a concrete pillar, unharmed but traumatized by the violence surrounding him. He would testify before federal grand juries, then disappear into witness protection with a new identity and federal supervision. It's finished, Paul said as they watched federal agents process the crime scene. The Kozlov organization is completely eliminated. Ted nodded, but his satisfaction was tempered by larger concerns. The Russian associates had been warned about the trap, suggesting other criminal organizations were monitoring law enforcement activities. Chicago's underworld was more sophisticated than anyone realized. 2 weeks later, Ted stood in federal court as Judge Stanley Haas sentenced the surviving Kozlov associates to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Dmitry Kozlov himself had been found guilty on 17 federal charges, including racketeering, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. The court finds that the defendant's actions represent a clear and present danger to public safety, Judge Haas declared. These sentences reflect the seriousness of organized crime activities and serve as a deterrent to others who might threaten American families. Katie squeezed Ted's hand as they listened to the verdicts. His daughter had testified during the trial, describing her kidnapping with composed dignity that impressed prosecutors and jury members alike. The experience had changed her, revealing strength Ted had always known she possessed. Eleanor sat beside them, elegant in a dark blue suit that emphasized her natural grace. She'd supported Katie throughout the trial proceedings while managing her own recovery from trauma. The woman Ted had married 30 years ago had emerged from this crisis stronger than ever. Outside the federal courthouse, reporters surrounded the Barlow family seeking interviews about their ordeal and recovery. Ted handled their questions with professional courtesy while revealing nothing about his background or methods. "How does it feel to see justice served?" asked a television reporter. "Justice is never satisfying when it comes at such a high cost," Ted replied. "We're grateful for law enforcement's professionalism and glad these criminals can't threaten other families. Will you be taking additional security precautions?" Ted's smile was enigmatic. "My family security arrangements are not for public discussion." That evening, the Barlows celebrated at their favorite restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. Snow was falling again, but inside the warm dining room, they could focus on rebuilding their lives and relationships. "So what happens now?" Katie asked, raising her wine glass. "Do we just go back to normal life?" Ted considered the question carefully. Normal life would never be completely possible after what they'd experienced. The violation of their family's security had revealed vulnerabilities that couldn't be ignored. "We move forward," Ted said finally. "Stronger, smarter, and more careful about who we trust." Eleanor nodded agreement. "And we remember that family is the only thing that really matters. Everything else is just details." As they drove home through Chicago's snow-covered streets, Ted's secure phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted source. Word is spreading through the community. The Barlow family is untouchable. No one wants to be the next Kozlov organization. Ted smiled grimly and deleted the message. Sometimes justice came through federal courts and legal proceedings. Sometimes it came through more direct methods. The criminal underworld understood only one language: strength and consequences. The Kozlov organization had learned that lesson permanently. Any other criminal group, considering the Barlow family as a target, would remember what happened to Russians who made that mistake. Paul called as they were pulling into their driveway. "I'm getting inquiries from security firms in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. Everyone wants to know how we coordinated such a perfect operation." "Tell them it's proprietary methodology," Ted replied. "Some techniques aren't for public consumption." As the family settled into their home for the evening, Ted reflected on the past month's events. His military training and business experience had combined to protect his family and eliminate threats with surgical precision. The operation had been flawless, the outcome decisive. But more importantly, the experience had strengthened family bonds that criminal pressure had tested. Eleanor and Katie understood him better now, recognizing the skills and determination that had made their peaceful life possible. They were no longer just protected, they were partners in their own security. The Kozlov organization was finished. Lowell Beard would spend decades in federal prison, and criminal organizations throughout Chicago understood that the Barlow family was permanently off limits. Ted had achieved total victory. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months after the federal courthouse verdicts, Ted stood in his expanded office suite overlooking Lake Michigan. Barlow Securities had grown into one of the Midwest's premier security consulting firms, with contracts spanning corporate protection, federal consulting, and international operations. The successful Kozlov case had established their reputation as problem solvers who delivered results. Paul entered with quarterly reports showing revenues up 300% from the previous year. We're turning away clients. Every corporation in Chicago wants the security team that dismantled a Russian crime family in 72 hours. Ted reviewed the financial statements with satisfaction. Success was measured in more than money, but financial security provided his family the independence that made everything else possible. Eleanor could pursue her charitable interests without concern, and Katie could rebuild her life without economic pressure. Any word from federal authorities about new cases? Ted asked. Agent Stokes has 3 organized crime operations he wants our consultation on. ICE has a human trafficking case requiring our international contacts. The State Department is interested in our overseas capabilities. Ted nodded, but his focus remained primarily local. Chicago's criminal landscape had shifted significantly since the cause law of elimination. Word had spread through underground networks that certain families were untouchable, protected by capabilities most criminals couldn't comprehend. Virgil McCormick knocked and entered with surveillance reports. Nothing unusual to report. Your family's movements are clean, no suspicious activity or unexpected interest. Since the trial, Ted had implemented comprehensive security protocols for his family. Eleanor's daily routines included discreet protection teams. Katie's apartment had been moved to a secure building with controlled access, and their Winnetka home featured military-grade security systems. How's Katie adjusting to the new arrangements? Ted asked. She's adapting well, Virgil replied. Understands the necessity and cooperates fully. No complaints about privacy or independence restrictions. Katie had returned to work at her consulting firm, but with better understanding of personal security and risk assessment. The kidnapping experience had matured her dramatically, revealing strength and resilience Ted had always known she possessed. She was dating again, carefully, with full background checks on potential partners, but approached relationships with appropriate caution. Eleanor appeared in the office doorway, carrying coffee and wearing the bright smile that had captured Ted's heart 30 years ago. The trauma of her ordeal had faded, replaced by quiet confidence and deeper appreciation for their family's security. How are my favorite security professionals? She asked, distributing coffee to the men. Keeping Chicago safe for decent families, Paul replied with genuine affection for Ted's wife. Eleanor had become something of a legend among Barlow Security's personnel. The story of her survival and courage during the kidnapping had spread through their organization, creating almost protective reverence for the boss's family. No one would ever question resources dedicated to Eleanor Barlow's safety. Katie called. Eleanor continued. She's bringing someone to dinner Sunday night. A lawyer named Alan Trujillo who works for the state attorney's office. Ted raised an eyebrow. A prosecutor? That's interesting. She said you'd approve of his background. Former military, no criminal associations, clean financial history. She's learning, Paul observed with approval. Ted was pleased that Katie was taking relationships seriously, applying lessons learned from her disastrous marriage to Kirk Douglas. The experience had been traumatic but educational, teaching her to evaluate partners' characters rather than just their surface charm. That afternoon, Ted met with Brian Estes to review the estate planning changes necessary after recent events. Katie's trust fund had been restructured with additional security provisions, while Ted's will included specific instructions for protecting his family if anything happened to him. The legal foundation is solid, Brian reported. Your family is protected financially, legally, and operationally. No criminal organization could successfully target them again. Ted studied the legal documents establishing offshore trusts, secure communications protocols, and emergency procedures that would activate if his family faced future threats. The Kozlov case had revealed vulnerabilities he'd never considered. Now those gaps were permanently closed. Brian hesitated before continuing. There's one other matter. The Illinois Bar Association wants to discuss Lowell Beard's case. They're considering new ethics rules about attorney-client privilege and information security. Good, Ted replied. Lawyers need to understand that betraying client confidentiality carries serious consequences. Beard himself was serving 15 years in federal prison, having cooperated fully with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would be released eventually, But his legal career was finished and his reputation destroyed. The man who'd sold Ted's family information for gambling money had paid a price that would follow him forever. Sunday dinner brought Alan Trujillo to the Barlow home for the first time. The young prosecutor was impressive. Stanford law degree, Army Reserve Service, spotless reputation in the state attorney's office. More importantly, he looked at Katie with genuine affection and respect. "Your daughter tells me you're in the security business," Alan said, accepting a bourbon from Ted. "Corporate consulting and risk assessment," Ted replied carefully. "Helping companies protect their assets and personnel." Alan's smile suggested he knew more than he was saying. "I heard about your work on the Kozlov case. Impressive coordination with federal authorities." Ted studied the young man, recognizing intelligence and discretion. Alan Trujillo understood exactly who Theodore Barlow was and what he was capable of achieving. That knowledge didn't intimidate him. It impressed him. "Katie's safety is my priority," Ted said simply. "Understand completely," Alan replied. "And I respect the measures necessary to ensure that safety." After dinner, Ted found Eleanor on their bedroom balcony, watching snow fall over Lake Michigan. The view was peaceful, belying the violence and danger they'd survived 6 months earlier. "He seems like a good man," Eleanor said, discussing Alan without needing to name him. "Better than good," Ted agreed. "He understands what it means to protect someone you love." Eleanor leaned against her husband's shoulder, finding comfort in his strength and presence. "Do you think we'll ever feel completely safe again?" Ted considered the question honestly. "Safety is relative, sweetheart, but we're as protected as any family can be. Because of what you did to the Kozlovs? Because of what we learned about ourselves, about what we're capable of when our family is threatened." As snow continued falling outside their home, Ted reflected on the past year's events. The Kozlov organization had been eliminated, Lowell Beard was serving federal prison time, and criminal organizations throughout Chicago understood that certain families were permanently off limits. More importantly, the experience had revealed the depth of his family's strength and resilience. Eleanor had survived kidnapping and abandonment with grace and courage. Katie had endured terrorism and betrayal while maintaining her essential optimism and trust in humanity. Ted's secure phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted source. Chicago families under Barlow protection now include 3 federal judges, 2 state senators, and 5 Fortune 500 CEOs. Your reputation is creating a security umbrella over the entire city. Ted smiled and deleted the message. Sometimes protecting one family meant protecting many families. Sometimes personal justice served larger purposes. The criminal underworld now understood that Chicago contained forces they couldn't challenge or corrupt. Theodore Barlow had achieved something beyond simple revenge or even justice. He'd established a new order where decent families could live without fear of criminal predation, protected by capabilities most people couldn't imagine. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing Chicago in pristine white that covered all sins and started each day fresh. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight the Barlow family was safe, secure, and stronger than ever. Ted had kept his promise to Eleanor 30 years ago. He would always protect their family, no matter what it cost or who stood in his way. That promise had been tested by Russian criminals and corrupt lawyers, by kidnapping and betrayal, by forces that had destroyed other families and shattered other lives. The promise had held. The family had survived. Justice had been served. And Theodore Barlow's enemies had learned, permanently and finally, why they should have chosen different targets. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.